Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this special episode of the Lavigne Show as we continue the conversation about the BC ostriches at Universal Ostrich Farm, the situation with the Supreme Court, with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And we're having a conversation with an American, a friend of ours now, Nicolas Hulscher. I still haven't got it yet.
Hulscher.
Hey, not bad. Okay, I got it. Epidemiologist with the McCullough Foundation. And what I really am trying to get out of this conversation is an American's perspective on what's going on in BC. He's also been looking into the situation himself, naturally. And when I reached out to him, I said, hey, do you know anybody on the U.S. side that's been looking into this issue in BC? He says, actually, here's my article. And so I thought, okay, perfect. This is what we want, because we want to see outside of the Canadian borders, what are other people saying, and maybe their perspective on what's going on here. So, Nicolas, thank you very much for joining today on this special episode as we continue the conversation about the BC ostriches. First, let me just thank you for making the time, and let's go ahead and jump into the article that you wrote and what got you interested enough about what's happening here in Canada to go ahead and write this article.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. And I just want to say this entire situation with Universal Ostrich Farms and these ostriches is it's one of the most embarrassing debacles of the Canadian government in what appears to be a very, very long time. So what's wrong with this, right? So, well, I guess it was about a year ago, right, when they issued the order to exterminate all the ostriches, right? And we have to remember these ostriches are vital for research purposes, right? Because they have natural antibodies that can be used for various purposes, vital for the advancement of understanding avian influenza in general. So they're very important ostriches, right? So about a year ago, yeah, they have a few PCR detections on a few dead ostriches, and they issued the order to exterminate all of them. Now, as the months go by, right, there's been a bunch of stay orders, right? They've been saying, okay, we're going to kill them. Oh, okay, now we can't. Now we will. Now we can't. So there's been a long kind of process here. But over that entire process, not one of these ostriches has bird flu at this point in time, right? It already circulated through the farm about a year ago, and so they all have natural immunity. And they won't even test them for the natural immunity. They won't even test them to see if they still have avian influenza, despite, like you mentioned before this talk, what they've offered them $100,000. They still won't test them. So it's so ridiculous that the Canadian government would now go and exterminate hundreds of healthy ostriches with vital antibodies, with no bird flu, just because they're following orders, just because of this reckless policy. And so my opinion is this has to stop immediately. If this goes forward, it will be one of the most catastrophic mistakes of the Canadian government, and they will be forever looked at as evil. This is an evil act, right? It simply put, that's what this is. This is their livelihoods, Universal Ostrich Farm. They don't want their healthy ostriches to be exterminated. And we know now they've rounded them up in the death pen, right? There's so many videos circulating online. So they're in the pen. The government exterminators have come in. They've blocked camera access. They've sent the police were in there. There's a picture of like 10 police officers. I mean, so this is the Canadian government at its worst.
Well, let me give you a couple updates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up your article, and we'll go through where we were at September 29th when your article was put together. And then we'll kind of catch you up because there's been a few things that happened since then. But as you pointed out here, nearly 400 healthy ostriches, and Canada's has a mass order call on them. And this is, okay, well, let's kind of do a little bit of background about avian flu, so H5N1. What are your thoughts about the world's response to it? Is it really something that should be this concerning? And over the last five years or so, this has been basically the process. They would stamp out a herd if they find one or two examples within that herd. What are your thoughts about the world not necessarily just a health organization, but the world's response to avian flu in general?
Yeah, well, I would say the most concerning aspects of this entire avian influenza situation since 2020, 2021 actually stems from gain of function research, where they've been manipulating bird flu viruses for the past decades in various biolabs across the world, actually. Here, University of or Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands. They've been modifying bird flu viruses there for a long time, making them transmissible to humans. We also have University of Wisconsin Madison. They with Yoshihiro Kawaoka. He's been toying with bird flu viruses for about a decade, making them more transmissible to humans. And they had a few lab accidents, lab leaks, puncture wounds of the lab workers with these modified bird flu viruses. And then we actually have a peer-reviewed study out on this. We actually suspect this entire avian influenza situation, at least the most recent outbreak where it began infecting mammals, over 50 mammalian species, anomalously. We believe this actually stemmed from a laboratory leak from the Southeast Poultry Research Laboratory in Athens, Georgia, where they've been conducting serial passage bird flu gain of function since 2021. Shortly thereafter, we outlined this in our study. All of a sudden, a new strain was detected in close proximity to this laboratory. And then that very same strain that came from Georgia, where this lab is, was found in a dolphin off the coast of Florida with necrosis in its brain and organs. So, that's what we're most concerned about, right? Instead of stamping out all the poultry, all the ostriches, and murdering all the birds, perhaps we should stamp out the gain of function research that's been ongoing.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't know this part of the details. That's why I kind of just pulled the article down. We'll get back to that in a second. I've heard this story before. Okay, there seems to be a lot of things, but there was a Wuhan lab instead on that one. So you're telling me that there's suspicion or some sort of research that ties this to a lab in Georgia where this was the result of some gain of function research that may have gotten away from them? Did I hear those details right?
Yes, you did. And if you search our Substack, you'll find our study on it. There'll be a link to that study. It's peer reviewed also. So, we lay out that we give a map. You'll see a map where we lay out all the detections of this suspected laboratory derived strain. Because you have to remember, bird flu, there's been human infections over the past 20 or so years, and it historically had, they claim a 50% mortality rate. But recently, since 2021 and the new outbreak, it's had almost zero fatality rate in humans, right? It's infected about 60, apparently, in the U.S. at least, 60 humans, and only one or two died, and they had like 5 comorbidities, and they probably didn't even die of the bird flu. So it's not what has been circulating in the past. It is a novel strain that appears to have been manipulated to have a large host range expansion.
Okay, so some of the research I was doing, and I had Dr. Stephen Pelech on, and he highlighted that the deaths in the U.S. Were actually basically isolated to workers of culling themselves. So while they were culling the animals, some infections were done there, and the deaths were related to people who were participating in the culling, not out in the wild, like not just somebody went to a park, fed a bird, and then was dead. And we had one in Canada, one infection confirmed, of a young girl who had some comorbidity. She was ill, and she had an immune issue where her immune was suppressed a bit. And then they think through her dog, not through a bird and not through an ostrich, but through her dog, she may have gotten it and she recovered from it. So we have 0 deaths in Canada. We have 1 confirmed test, but 0 deaths in Canada. Okay, so I'm still wrapping my head around this whole gain of function. It could be the origin of this. What else can you tell us about that? Like, why were they doing, if it's known, this gain of function research? Was it for weapons? Was it for trying to, like they claim for COVID, be prepared for something like that? Like, what do you think the purpose of doing this gain of function research in the first place on avian flu was?
Yeah, their claimed purpose was to, prepare in case it happens, in the wild, and they'll know what to do. That's their claimed purpose. But in 2014, this is actually why there was a pause on gain of function research over 10 years ago. It's the exact reason, because at University of Wisconsin-Madison, they had all these lab accidents with the modified bird flu viruses. So this has been like it was actually a big topic a bit, that many years ago, and they haven't stopped. They haven't stopped. And if you look at somebody named John Fleetwood, he's been reporting on this on the daily, weekly, where there's now new studies that come out in the peer-reviewed literature, seemingly now every month, maybe a few a month, where they're literally creating chimeric bird flu strains and shipping them transnationally. This is all ongoing. So they are actively manipulating, modifying bird flu viruses, challenging animals with it. They claim it's so they can develop vaccines. But with all of this manipulation going on, we have to remember there was a study by Blacksell and colleagues in a Lancet journal that found over 300 lab leaks have occurred since 2001. So lab leaks are not uncommon. So all of this risks, leaking out, starting to infect wild animals. And that's most definitely what appears to have happened in this case, as we outlined in our study. And, they have these all sitting in freezers. If they want to do a deliberate release now, they could if they wanted to. And so this is what needs to be stopped. That's really what needs to be stopped. And they're developing self-amplifying mRNA shots for bird flu. That's what they would want to roll out in the event of a pandemic. So now we see this bird flu is now reaching the news cycle again, especially here in the U.S. They recently exterminated, mass culled 4 million chickens for so-called bird flu PCR detections in the past 30 days here in the U.S. So it's coming back, and USDA here is developing a plan to mass vaccinate chickens against bird flu. So this is expected to accelerate all of this bird flu stuff again as we move towards the winter.
Okay, so let's peel this one back a little bit. Are they talking about mRNA technology as well with these vaccines for the birds?
For the birds, they're testing some are genetic, but the one that we're concerned about was actually already conditionally approved. It's by the company Zoetis. It's an H5N2 vaccine. So it's a mismatched vaccine, but it's been conditionally approved for avian influenza for H5N1. And so they can basically sign off on it and start deploying it to be injected. Now, this is not mRNA. This is antigen based. So that's at least better than mRNA, but it's leaky. It will not prevent infection, and it'll cause mutations, immune escape. The virus would still replicate in these chickens. Maybe they claim it'll reduce their mortality, but as it still replicates in their body and they're vaccinated with a leaky vaccine, that will drive mutations and could spark human adaptation. So this can't happen. It'll also contaminate the food supply. We'll all be consuming toxic antigens.
Okay, now there's a term I've been looking into quite a bit recently, especially since COVID, was leaky vaccines, and you used it a couple times there. This is well known. This is pre-COVID. There's lots of studies about this. Pulled them up, just a couple of years ago as I was looking into could COVID, the vaccine itself, become a leaky one. You want to kind of let people know what that means, like what is the term leaky vaccine, and why you said mutations a couple of times there associated with it?
Yes, leaky vaccine means it does not protect you fully from infection. So you will still be infected. It does not provide what's called sterilizing immunity, because really no vaccine can provide that, particularly ones that are based on single antigens, like the one they have conditionally approved. So if it's just a single antigen, that you will still be infected. You don't have broad spectrum immunity against the whole of the pathogen, all of the proteins, the nucleocapsid. You won't have any of that. So that's why it's called leaky, because you still get infected and you can still shed it, right? And so it's leaky. You still be leaking out the pathogens, and risking mutations in the process, because it will be interacting in such a way in your body as an attempt to kind of so your immunity with this single antigen will put what's called immune pressure on the pathogen itself, trying to replicate, and it can cause mutations.
And mutations are basically the pathogen's way of surviving and trying to be able to go ahead and replicate itself. And this is how we get variants and other things like that, and possibly more destructive or less destructive, but more destructive as this tries to survive and actually kill the host and spread itself. Am I on the right track on this understanding?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. So yeah, it'll be like what's called single like amino acid changes, single small little changes in the structure of its of the influenza's hemagglutinin protein that it uses to attach onto surface cell receptors. That can slightly change. If that's slightly changed, it can increase its adaptability to other species. And so, yeah, you do not want a leaky vaccine introducing these mutations. And it's just not a good idea. And when we've seen it in the past too, China mass vaccinated their chickens against avian influenza, over a decade ago. And there's actually a study by Lee and colleagues that literally found, when you mass vaccinate these poultry chickens against avian influenza, it does drive these mutations, and it literally creates new strains. So this is all documented in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not even just a hypothetical suspicion. It's actually what happens.
And that was my concern with the COVID one. It was great variations. It could get stronger. It could become more deadly. Maybe you can recover from it now, but a couple of generations of mutations, and we could be in some serious trouble here. And that's what you expect from a leaky vaccine. This is what the warnings were as early. Like, I went back to at least 2016, and there was papers about this and warnings about this. You're kind of triggering some of my concerns again, what I had with COVID, but now with this one, H5N1. Why are they having so much trouble addressing it? And the concerns about it jumping to the animal human, making that leap, hasn't been validated. Like, it doesn't seem to actually be happening, but yet they're still using that as part of their reason to go ahead and call millions of birds at a time, animals at a time. Why do you think they're taking so many missteps on this one at this stage? Is it ignorance or something else? Malfeasance, maybe?
Yeah, we actually have a McCullough Foundation a short documentary on this very issue of mass culling and bird flu and why it's bad. So it's been an entrenched policy for about 100 years, over 100 years, where when there's an outbreak in animals, they just go and exterminate all of them. But this policy does not work when a pathogen is widespread in the environment. And when I say that, I mean all right. So say a farm gets infected, right? There's a chicken that gets bird flu. When you go and exterminate all those chickens, none of them, and then you replace them with new chickens, none of the new chickens will have any immunity. And then the main source of the infection of bird flu is actually from migratory waterfowl that fly in over the farms and infect the chickens. So it's a continuous cycle of death and destruction and supply chain collapse if you continue to mass cull, because literally the new flocks, they'll just be reinfected. Now, if you let the flocks develop natural immunity, right? Some will die, of course, but not all of them will die. The surviving ones will be immune, and they will not be infected the next time a flock of mailer ducks comes roaring in. And so that would put an end to this much, much quicker. What we're doing now, you're just prolonging the issue, driving up egg prices. Many people can't even afford eggs or meat products at this point in time. They're in deep poverty, and so you make it harder for them to eat, and you inhumanely, barbarically slaughter all these chickens. And what they use ventilation shutdown plus, basically put them in a room and cut off the oxygen supply, kind of just suffocate to death. And then you also have foam depopulation. So they spray, they put the chickens in a death coop and spray foam onto them, and they just suffocate in the foam while they try and get out. And then, like you mentioned earlier, that does also result in chicken to human transmission. And it's one of the only sources of chicken to human transmission when they mass cull the birds, because they're trying to get out of this foam. They're trying to get out of this, and all this dandruff pops up, the workers inhale it. So the entire thing's a disaster, and it's costed, at least here in America, taxpayers over $1 billion to do these reckless operations. So, it's got to go. We need alternative methods.
Okay, so you highlighted something very important there. Like when they get infected and they live, the ones that live, they now have antibodies and they're immune to it. This would make a lot more sense to me than putting human-created anything into the birds and the food supply. But this would be a better way to go ahead and eliminate bird flu altogether. The only thing that I think it actually helps is if you want to create a vaccine and make a lot of money from vaccines, you want to have a population of poultry that isn't immune, so that you create this, and then you enter that into the food supply. I'm not saying that the reason they're doing it is to enter the food supply. I don't know, that's speculation. But not letting natural immunity take hold seems to be what they're stopping here for whatever reason. We can kind of tinfoil hat and go into some of those, but just on the surface level, why wouldn't you want 50% that lived to be the ones that pass on to the next generations the ability to do this? So if they did do that, would the offspring of these birds inherit the immunity from their parents, or are they going to be more susceptible to developing immunity? Like, what would the next generation look like if they were allowed to live and go ahead and create new generations?
Yeah, it would be actually suspected that the new generations would have some immunity transferred from their parents who faced it and developed the antibodies, developed the immunity. It's suspected that their offspring would also have at least some form of protection as well. So they just keep wiping out that entire line of protection. They have no protection, right? So they slaughter them, and then the new ones, they'll throw them in enclosed facilities, right? And it'll never end, right? It'll never end with what I call the mass culling cycle of destruction, because that's what it is. It's an endless loop that fails. It's failed because this bird flu situation has been going on for 5 years, and it reliably every fall and winter the same thing happens. They start the culling again. And one thing, though, that's key that people should understand is when they stamp out, they call it a farm, they do it based on a single pooled PCR test. So what they'll do is they'll go in the flock, they'll swab a few birds, maybe 5-10 birds, and then they put it in a pooled container of all these swabs, right? So it's all in one little container, and then they test that pooled container. And if it's positive, even if it's a false positive, they will exterminate the millions or hundreds of thousands of chickens. So that's also very bad, a very bad way of doing this verification. And so it's not like they don't isolate the ones that test positive. They don't know which ones test positive. They just assume they're all positive and kill all of them.
And one thing that we learned about the PCR test is it can be very good at determining whether or not something exists, but it doesn't tell you whether or not it made any infection or caused the illness. It just says, yeah, that was present, but it doesn't say necessarily enough quantities to cause illness, or it doesn't actually say or test or provide a way of saying you were sick. And we saw this with COVID. Like, you can come back with a positive and not be ill at all, and not be passing at all, or not in quantities that makes you sick. Is that the same thing here with the PCR test? They can isolate and say, yeah, it's present, but that has no way of saying whether or not it's causing illness.
Right, exactly. It's the same thing. It's the very same thing. And we don't know what their amplification thresholds are. So when that threshold is could be low or high, and it could skew the results if they amplify it, say 100 times with the threshold at 100. That'll pick up really anything, and you can find a bird flu in anything if you do that. So that was never disclosed what the thresholds are. So it's really just a bad thing, a very bad thing. And now that it's ramping up again, in I think Canada, right? Canada's calling some chickens for bird flu as well, right? Recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
Saskatchewan. Yeah, Saskatchewan. It just happened, I think, a couple days ago.
Yeah, so they're ramping up this again. RFK did indicate in March that he and these are his quotes. He said most of our scientists are against the culling operation. So he said that, but it doesn't seem like he's doing anything about it. So now would be the time for RFK and at least our HHS here to stop this nonsense and implement protocols that will put an end to this quicker than exterminating all the birds. And the problem is, so the people who say that's a bad idea to let it run through the flock, they say that, well, okay, then all the chickens, if we let the infection run through, then that will drive mutations. So that's what they say. But this is never going to end, right? If there's no immunity at all, and the mallard ducks keep coming in, it's just never going to end. We can't be in a situation where we do this and end up in the cycle of destruction. We got to find a way out, and it's not mass vaccination.
Well, speaking of that, some say that these ostriches may hold the key to that question right there. How did they develop immunity to this? Why are they still alive? And is there a way via research to take these particular ones from BC who survived a high survival rate, and then use that research and to provide a treatment for others? BC has a $2.5 million project on the horizon, which is meant to do exactly that. Find other ways to treat the poultry industry, because it's very destructive and costly for everybody to do all of this culling. So they want to find a different way to do it. Would these birds, specifically these birds, assist with that research and potentially finding a treatment?
Yes, they would. They would. They're vital. They're absolutely vital. And so they could be of critical importance in finding therapeutics, medicines, and anything. It's studying, immunity, natural immunity dynamics. There's so much stuff they could study with these ostriches now that they just don't care. They just don't care. They just want to exterminate them because the protocol says to. And so it's literally caveman like thinking of the Canadian government. Absolutely terrible. So what they should do is, first of all, revoke the call, revoke the order to exterminate the birds, and begin researching them, right? Maybe they could come with a trade-off at the farm. Allow us to do research, and we won't kill them, right? Do something. Don't just murder them. This has to stop. This has to be reversed immediately.
Well, under the Canadian law, so the Animal Health Act and the regulations associated to it, there's actually 3 ways for this to stop. One of them is if there's treatment. So some way to actually treat these birds so they don't have to die. That is an option. under the Animal Health Act. Another one is research value. So if there's a reason to keep them alive for research value, that is another one of the ways to keep them alive. And then the last one is ultimately it's discretion. This is the discretion of the CFIA. They don't actually have to do it. If they come up with a good reason and use their discretion, they can. Dr. Stephen Pelech also highlighted that our international agreements allow the burnout period. So the burnout period used to be 3 months. It's now 1 month. And after the burnout period, if there is no more illness and there is no evidence of illness, then you don't have to call them all. Why do you think the Canadian government or this agency, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, is so determined to wipe out these birds when there's an ample evidence, at least right now, to go ahead and look into the research value, determine whether or not there is a research value, because that could help moving forward, getting rid of the problem altogether. But they seem to be very closed-minded to that. All the way to the federal court didn't allow this particular conversation to continue because the federal court determined that they weren't going to hear the science. They only wanted to know what they were only going to determine whether or not the CFIA had the authority to go ahead and do this order, which they determined they do. But they didn't even look into any of these exceptions under the Canadian Animal Health Act and whether or not there was research value. They actually denied the experts that wanted to bring that forward into court. So it's a pretty weird situation up here. I'm trying to kind of figure out if there's a motive to why they're so determined to kill these birds.
Yeah, they want to show, I guess, that they're in control, that they make the decisions, that, you got to do what they say, just like with the COVID debacle, just like with the vaccines, right? You got to do what they say, what the Canadian government says. And so it's just an example of their totalitarian nature, their anti-life nature. And they're showing their true colors now.
And there's also the potential that there's an industry that would be very valuable if vaccinating the birds was the only solution. This feels a lot like ivermectin and other things that were available to people during COVID, but they kind of pushed that away and said, no, we don't want that around. In fact, if you even talk about it, we're going to take away your medical license in order to roll out emergency vaccines when there's no other alternative. If they're determined to bring vaccines for birds out and put it in every bird in such fashion, making sure there's no alternative like antibody-based filtering systems for the air are around, because then there's only really one option. Are you familiar with the Kyoto peer-reviewed study about using antibodies to filter out the virus and also use it for staining so you can detect that the virus is actually there? Are you familiar with some of that testing specifically around, I think it was SARS-CoV-2 and before that?
No, I haven't specifically seen that paper, but when you say a filtering system, do you mean like you say you install like a filtration system in a farm? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that was the ultimate goal at one point for this was there's research from as far back as 2008, peer-reviewed, out of Kyoto, where you can take the antibodies of a virus, inject it into a filter like a mask, and it's 99% effective of actually capturing it. When the virus can go through the mask because it's so small, but the mask is only a certain size, the antibodies themselves can do the capturing. So this was in 2008, like way before COVID, that this peer review study came out, and it was like 99, possibly even 99.9% effective. This is where this was headed with these particular birds, where they were actually coordinating with that effort to see if they can then take that technology and then apply it to the filtration system, the air system, to go ahead and remove H5N1 from the air, so before it even reaches the birds. And there was also talk about that can be stained. So when it's activated, the filter will change color to let you know that it has captured some of them. So this was where some of the research and technology was going before the order to call these birds were. But I'm curious if stopping that effort might be a motive if you just want to vaccinate all birds instead of doing something like that.
Yeah, since their ultimate goal is mass vaccination for animals and humans, they would not like to see that advance. That is for sure. And that sounds like a fantastic idea In fact, I interviewed somebody last March on and also a filtration system that they developed for farms as well. They use a form of hydrogen peroxide dispersion in farms, and all other forms of air purification technology. So yeah, but the antibody one sounds particularly effective and nice, especially since it would be stained if it's exposed to the antigen. So yeah, these systems should be put in place, should be tested. They should be testing them full stop on all these farms. But yeah, they don't want alternatives, just like they didn't want ivermectin. They didn't want hydroxychloroquine. They didn't want anything alternative. They didn't want zinc or vitamin C or vitamin D. They just wanted injectable products. And so, and the only way they can deploy injectable products is if there's no alternatives. And so, yeah, they're just pushing for vaccines, and that's got to stop. That's got to stop. We got to go towards these alternatives.
And that's where there's another connection here that I thought was interesting in my research. So there's a company, research company in Quebec named Immune Biosolutions, or Bioimmunology, something along those lines. I can get you the actual name. They received a $13.44 million grant from the Canadian government early in the whole COVID cycle to come up with alternatives for treatment. This was before vaccines were rolling out. So the government gave them this grant, and what they were doing is they were basing it on that research I was telling you about from 2008 to see if they can do antibody injection into like a N95 type of mask, where the N95 mask doesn't stop the virus. The virus is far smaller. But if it was immune or antibody injected, would it also have the same result of stopping 99.9% of the virus from entering? That research got stopped after it was showing some promise, and then vaccines rolled out. So there's, and this lab, not this lab, but this farm was involved in some of that research because they were using their eggs to produce the antibodies to go ahead and test with these masks. So there's a few moving pieces here, which it seems like this isn't well, we're worried about our trade agreements, or we're worried about spreading to humans, or we're worried about spreading to other farms. It seems like these birds, specifically these birds, may have the key to help protect humans through this kind of technology and help to protect the industries of poultry and for the avian flu as well. So there's maybe a couple of reasons why somebody or some group may want these birds gone, because it's going to destroy potential markets in the future. And I just started to do this research the last 2 weeks, but that Kyoto peer-reviewed paper, I think, was pretty key to this, because it showed that you could use antibodies in a filtration system, whether it's a mask that you're wearing or a system that's cleaning the air. Both cases, it did show promise that it worked. So maybe these particular birds have a few reasons, or a few organizations that do not want them to prove this particular science any further. Thoughts on that?
Yes, that makes complete sense. They don't want to advance these alternatives because if they're shown to be effective and they're already operational, they literally will not be able to roll out vaccines, because their vaccines that they test are never adequately tested to show they have proper efficacy or safety, even in animals. Usually the animal ones, they test them, do some field testing, and, a small number of animals, follow them for about, maybe a week, few days, and then they euthanize all of them. And so that's usually how they test these animal vaccines. And so, yeah, based on the data on those, that would not be able to override something that's already effective and operational. So, yeah, they will delay that as much as they can until they can roll out their vaccines. And that's been the playbook, as we see all the time. They only want vaccines. They want nothing else. And again, this is dangerous. This is a dangerous thing. The people running the Canadian government, whoever's making the decision on this, particularly the ostriches, they should be fired. And they should be fired immediately. Resolve this crisis, end this crisis, and that would really help restore a lot of faith, I think, among Canadians. I think that it would be a very positive thing, And I don't know why they don't want to capitalize on that, but that's how anti-life they really are.
And to kind of take this scenario of the ostriches and kind of put a real world view on it, like to compare it, this would be like a long-term care facility or a retirement home, having COVID outbreak go through it, and then taking all the unvaccinated survivors and then killing them because they may have been exposed to it. And you just don't know if they're going to spread or not. So you just decide to just kill them all. That's basically what they're doing with these ostriches. If the avian flu did go through there, let's presume it did, and these survived without vaccination and they're still alive, they should stay alive. Like, I don't understand why you want to kill them. So this whole save grandma mentality that we all went through to go ahead and, do things we didn't want to do, like lockdown, social distance, take an experiment. If we said save the ostriches, it would be the same thing. But why would you kill an entire long-term care facilities residents that survived unvaccinated from an outbreak? Am I making a fair comparison there? Like, or am I doing apples and oranges here?
No, it's a very, very fair comparison. You're right. If grandma's in the nursing home, right, COVID goes through the nursing home, maybe one of them dies, the rest are alive, and then you go in and kill them all anyways. That's exactly what's happening, and that's how barbaric and caveman like it is, and how ridiculous it is. And so, yeah, thinking of it that way is very important. Now, because it's animals, they don't care about animals at all, really at all, and so that's why they do it. But it's literally the same equivalent, right? There's no reason to kill them, and it should not happen. We would not go kill all the seniors in a nursing home facility. That would be mass murder, right? So it's no different.
Yeah, because also the survivors, and we would want to, hey, how did you survive? Let's check your antibodies, see if you have natural immunity or herd immunity. That would be actually beneficial as we're dealing with this if we wanted to really deal with it in a logical, scientific, medical way.
Well, one more thing, it would be like mass murdering the nursing home a year after the outbreak, which is even crazier.
That's a good point. Like, nobody's sick anymore. Everybody seems to be healthy. They're running around, dancing, doing their things, kind of like birds do and people do. And then you're like, now let's do it. You're like, whoa, like, can we at least test to see if this virus is still around? And say, no test, let's just kill. And that's kind of where a lot of people are at now. Can we test these birds and see if they are still carrying it? Are they sick? Are they shedding? Why are we even looking at that? Now, I don't know if we need to go through your article because our audience actually knows that timeline quite well. But one thing that your article didn't touch on was the injured bird in your article has now died. That was hen number 710, and the name was Spirit. And unfortunately, it didn't get the care and the electrolytes and the anti-inflammatories that it needed to fight off the injury, a torn tendon, and it ended up dying of septic shock. One thing that came out, though, is the autopsy was done by the CFIA, and they let us know it was septic shock that killed him, not avian flu. So we even have one dead bird in the custody of the CFIA that died, but not of avian flu. That, to me, is a huge red flag. Like, these must be healthy birds because this one, who's dead, didn't die from avian flu. Now that I've updated you on that particular piece of your research, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the CFIA exterminator agents are responsible for that death of that ostrich, right? In their custody, they didn't give him proper care, and he died as a result. And so this is the consequence of them barging in and rounding up all the ostriches and doing what they're doing. And so it's so stupid, right? I mean, what? So they rounded him up, and what are they doing now? Are they just waiting for the kill order? Is that what they're doing?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And in the process, the ostriches are dying. All of this is just crazy. It's literally crazy. What they should be doing is, first of all, leaving, right, and just studying the ostriches, right, keeping them, letting their owners still interact with their own ostriches, letting them do what they do. Why do they have to barge in and round them up into a death pen? It's just despicable. It's absolutely despicable.
100%, and there's a lot of people that agree with that. Now, recently, the Brazeau County, where I live, they invited me to come to the Agricultural Service Board to speak to this because there was some concern with local farmers here of this kind of overreach from CFIA. Like, could they do this here? Is it necessary? Is there alternatives to calling the entire herd? So they had me come and explain and share some of this information. So in Brazeau County, they passed a motion where they're going to encourage the CFIA president to reconsider this order and test the birds, prove that they need to die. And now it seems like the farming industry has taken notice. And it's almost like the Streisand effect. Like if they were quiet and kind of just let these birds live, it wouldn't have gotten this big where everybody's now concerned about the authority of the CFIA and whether or not their discretion is being used improperly, or whether or not there should be alternatives to their discretion, a way to challenge their decision with science and vets and other options. Are you surprised to hear that the industry now, for the farming industry, is now starting to push back? And this is turning into an international issue. Even Robert Kennedy on your side, Dr. Oz on your side, and others are pushing back that maybe we're doing the wrong thing with the stamping out policy on a global level.
Yeah, this has become a global situation, a global thing because of their foolish actions to go ahead and try and exterminate them. Now the entire world is watching, the entire world. And so they have a choice to be forever looked at as anti-life murderers with evil policies, literally, or revoke it and make the right choice and stop this and recover some of the dignity they may have left. So it's they have a choice now, and yeah, everybody's watching. Everybody's watching. So it would be very wise for them to stop this at once. Because yeah, RFK he issued a letter to him. Yeah, Dr. Oz, what he said, he would hold the ostriches in one of his farms, right? I think he said that. So it's I hope they make the right choice. I really do. I hope they make the right choice. And they know it's bad, right? I feel like these decision makers, they have to know it's bad. Because look at all the media coverage. I mean, you'll have some of the media coverage, though, right, saying that it's a good thing and why they need to murder all the ostriches for trade purposes. I get that. There's still that type of media coverage, but all the real people, real citizens that work day to day and aren't just reporters, they know it's evil. So this has to stop.
Yeah, if you do a little bit of research into it on both sides of the conversation, like what is CR or CFIA saying? What are the neighbors saying? What are the industry experts saying? If you do some research, it doesn't make a lot of sense at the end. Because what it sounds like to me is these birds develop some sort of immunity to H5N1. They're not even sure how and whether or not it's worth replicating. And there's a project like I mentioned in BC, 2.5 million, because they want to try and save the industry. One of the other things that came up was ostriches are not poultry. They're ratites. I probably haven't saying that wrong, but they're not actually poultry. It takes about 8 years before they can start producing eggs and have offspring. They can live up to like 60 years, sometimes more. This isn't poultry, but they're being treated as poultry. Do you think that the industry and the agencies involved here need to take a second look at how you classify this, and possibly ostriches should be treated a little bit differently?
Yeah, that's a big consideration for sure. Because you're right. Yeah, they're not poultry. They're not chickens. They're not turkeys. They are very long-lived creatures, and yeah, they should not be being murdered. Right here in America, they're not mass culling the cows when they're infected. Right, we're letting the cows survive it because most of them are surviving it, and so it should be the same sort of thing. They're not chickens. Classify them as something else, something obviously far more intelligent and long-lived.
Okay. So before the show, we were talking about the US side of things. So they started calling again, but there was a 3 month or so period where they stopped because they thought it was kind of under control or not an issue anymore. Can you kind of take us through that logic? Because during that time period too, the order to kill these birds were still going. Because again, this is a 9 month long issue now. So for a period of time, our neighbor to the south wasn't addressing it via stamping out anymore. Can you take us through that timeline?
Yeah, so in the past 4 months, so since June 2025, they basically stopped mass culling here in America. There was none, literally. But before that, from January to May 2025, they exterminated over 40 million chickens. 40 million, right? So all of a sudden, they stopped. And a lot of this, I think, had to do with public pressure on them to stop. A lot of it had to do with what they claim was there was less PCR detections, less detections of avian influenza in the flocks. But it stopped. It stopped for a long time, many months. And so now it has resumed. It has resumed. 4 million killed in the last month. It's going to continue to increase as we reach the winter months, as it has for the past 5 years. And we hope they don't reach, the 100 million mark again, just slaughtering just hundreds of millions. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, but it looks like that's the trajectory that we may be on again. So now's the time to address this. Now's the time to find the alternatives. Now's the time to test the alternatives and just stop allowing this stamping out practice to continue. It's failed. It's got to stop.
What are they doing about the wild birds? Are they mass culling them? Are they trying to trap them and kill them? Because here in Canada, they're doing absolutely nothing. And that's really where they believe that this infection came from. It came from a wild bird. So if you're not addressing how it's actually spreading, are you really addressing it? And this actually adds more credibility to the idea of allow immunity to develop and allow herd immunity to develop. Because you're never really going to stop the wild. In fact, this might be the way to stop the wild, as if going to farms isn't the way to spread anymore. Maybe in the wild, it'll actually go away too. Because I suspect in the wild, they're starting to develop immunity as well, because they're not all dying out of the air and we don't have ponds full of floating ducks. So they might be developing immunity as well. So this could be the way for it to phase out or burn out instead of stamp out.
Right, right. Yeah, many of them will do. Yeah, and I'm not aware of any. There's no efforts to capture wild birds and exterminate them. If they have bird flu, yeah, they're not doing that. But many of these mallard ducks actually serve as reservoirs for it, so they actually don't have any symptoms, but they're carriers of it, and so that's what happens. That's why they'll fly into these farms. And nobody will know the mallard ducks are infected. So, it's just a never-ending cycle. It's just a never-ending cycle. If we keep murdering the chickens, we need to allow them to survive this, to get the immunity, to put an end to it, and it's got to change. It's really got to change.
Now, part of the argument is infecting the food supply. So do you really want a bunch of birds that have the avian flu infecting the food supply? Is there any research about that it actually causes humans any harm? And the reason why I'm asking that is all over Canada, people duck hunt and then they eat the duck. So if the mallards actually have the virus, but it's not causing them to be sick, are we consuming it as humans by duck hunting and eating the birds anyways? And is there any evidence that actually that's harmful in any way, shape, or form? I'm curious more about the food supply concerns that some of the experts on the mainstream media has been talking about.
Well, that's why you just have to cook your food at high temperatures, and it will kill off any live pathogens. And so it's as simple as that. Just like with any other type of pathogen in a food product, a parasite, bacteria, viruses, you cook it at a high temperature, you're not going to get infected. Now, so just, if you eat it raw, though, right, you eat it raw, then, there could be a risk of, developing an infection. So but that risk can be ameliorated by cooking.
Okay, so to kind of recap on what we talked about here, in Georgia, via gain of function research, this was created and possibly leaked and got out there. And then there was a concern that it was going to harm humans, but that hasn't transpired. Like that actually didn't come to fruition. A policy was made to just stamp out globally, no matter where we find it. So we find it with a PCR test, which has unknown amplification, and you're also doing pooled testing as well. If there's any signal, we stamp out that entire herd. Doesn't seem to have stopped avian flu from spreading because the wild bird side of things still has it. It might be carrying it, not showing any symptoms. And it doesn't seem to be, from this conversation, a very big risk if you do consume a bird that did have it at some point and lived. As long as you cook things properly, that's not going to be a concern. So now I'm even more confused than I was at the beginning of this conversation of why we would have a justification to call these birds at all. It doesn't.
And operational. So yeah, they will delay that as much as they can until they can roll out their vaccines. And that's been the playbook, as we see all the time. They only want vaccines, they want nothing else. And again, this is dangerous. This is a dangerous thing. The people running the Canadian government, whoever's making the decision on this, particularly the ostriches, they should be fired. And they should be fired immediately. Resolve this crisis, end this crisis, and that would really help restore a lot of faith, I think, among Canadians. I think that it would be a very positive thing. But many of these mallard ducks actually serve as reservoirs for it. So they actually don't have any symptoms, but they're carriers of it. And so that's what happens. That's why, they'll fly into these farms and, nobody will know the mallard ducks are infected. So, it's just a never ending cycle. It's just a never ending cycle if we keep murdering the chickens. We need to allow them to survive this, to get the immunity, to put an end to it. And it's got to change. It's really got to change.
Now, part of the argument is infecting the food supply. So do you really want a bunch of birds that have the avian flu infecting the food supply? Is there any research about that it actually causes humans any harm? And the reason why I'm asking that is all over Canada, people duck hunt and then they eat the duck. So if the mallards actually have the virus, but it's not causing them to be sick, are we consuming it as humans by duck hunting and eating the birds anyways? And is there any evidence that actually that's harmful in any way, shape, or form? I'm curious more about the food supply concerns that some of the experts on the mainstream media has been talking about.
Well, that's why you just have to cook your food at high temperatures, and it will kill off any live pathogens. And so it's as simple as that. Just like with any other type of pathogen in a food product, a parasite, bacteria, viruses, you cook it at a high temperature, you're not going to get infected. Now, so just, if you eat it raw, though, right, you eat it raw, then, there could be a risk of, developing an infection. So but that risk can be ameliorated by cooking.
Okay, so to kind of recap on what we talked about here, in Georgia, via gain of function research, this was created and possibly leaked and got out there. And then there was a concern that it was going to harm humans, but that hasn't transpired. Like that actually didn't come to fruition. A policy was made to just stamp out globally, no matter where we find it. So we find it with a PCR test, which has unknown amplification, and you're also doing pooled testing as well. If there's any signal, we stamp out that entire herd. Doesn't seem to have stopped avian flu from spreading because the wild bird side of things still has it. It might be carrying it, not showing any symptoms. And it doesn't seem to be, from this conversation, a very big risk if you do consume a bird that did have it at some point and lived, as long as you cook things properly, that's not going to be a concern. So now I'm even more confused than I was at the beginning of this conversation of why we would have a justification to call these birds at all. There doesn't seem to be anything that holds up to, when you look at it critically, doesn't seem to hold up to any of what the experts on mainstream media are saying. Maybe they're not experts after all, but there doesn't seem to be any justification. Can you throw your devil's advocate hat on just for a second to see if there's any good reason that passes your rationale to go ahead and, like, the risk is too high, let's go ahead and just call these birds? Is there any that you can come up with?
Yeah, so the main risk that they bring up is when if you allow it to just continuously circulate in a, confined flock of chickens, there'll be mutations. And so that's the main thing, basically, right? But the thing is we can't keep doing this. It'll just be the same thing every year then. The same mass culling, the same mass murdering. Because again, like we addressed earlier, the reservoir or the vectors of this infection are wild animals. And so if you don't address that, it's never going to end. It's never going to end. And and honestly, there's also a possibility if you allow the chickens to get infected, right, and they develop immunity, they develop antibodies, some of that could actually be protective if we consume it. So that's also a possibility. Nobody's ever looked at that. So yeah, there's so many things that go into this, but and then they claim it's eugenics, like we're eugenicists by saying to allow only the fittest to survive, but they don't realize that they're the ones going and murdering every single one of them, right? So it's just ridiculous, that argument. So yeah, we can't just murder all of them. Need alternatives.
Yeah, the argument about the mutations, if you just leave it, there's a similar argument with leaky vaccines. So if you go down the vaccine route and they're leaky, then you still have that same environment. So you're not really solving that issue at all. And they would have to create, even what you said would be the first perfect vaccine that's ever been created, and created for the avian issue, to actually eliminate the whole mutation opportunity. So it doesn't matter if there's a leaky vaccine or natural. There will always be an environment where mutations can happen. But at least when it's natural, you also have the natural mutation for antibodies and recovery as well happening. When you stamp out, you don't even have that as an opportunity. You just keep killing them and then having fresh that have no exposure. So we're killing the opportunity for even the antibody mutations to be successful. Did I kind of capture that to your understanding as well?
Yes. And again, like we talked about earlier, since most of the human infections came from mass culling, that's also a thing. So when they go and mass murder all the birds, that's a driver of mutations in human infections. And so the more human infections you will have, that will amplify the risk much more than having it circulate in chickens. So again, that's another big negative of mass culling. It's literally just infecting the workers.
For thousands and thousands of years, humans been eating animals, and we didn't have PCR tests back then. And sometimes animals got sick and died, whether sheep, cows, or whatnot, or lambs. And we didn't respond this way. We didn't see a sick lamb and then we killed the whole herd. And we cooked our meat. We learned that as humans. Kill off any pathogens. We learned that as humans. You can get food poisoning from just going to a fancy restaurant. So there's a lot of risk with just food in general, but we never had these experts telling us to kill all of these animals because somebody saw a sick animal. So I don't know, maybe we're too smart for our own good at this stage, or we're just putting too much faith into agencies and experts and allowing them to convince us through fear that we need to take these kind of steps. But if this was 100 years ago and a bird died because a mallard came by and got it sick, we would have just moved on with life. I'm wondering if we are super sensitive now and maybe ignorantly sensitive at this stage, and maybe time to kind of go back to our previous understanding of, well, you just don't eat sick animals. You move on to the healthy ones and you cook it right.
Yeah. So what's happened is, yeah, we learned cooking thousands of years ago, right? We learned that. But yeah, the policies now, and the only policies it appears that the public health agencies want for this crisis is murder and injections. That's about it. No early treatment, no prophylactic of nasal sprays. Even nasal sprays for animals. There's a few studies, iodine-based nasal sprays that can wipe out bird flu infection and transmission in the farm, as well as it's not just that, but it's also they've also tested a few other things as well that have also shown much more efficacy than these leaky vaccines. So there's just so much stuff that's not being acknowledged. So yeah, they will always revert to death and injections.
Well, Nicolas, thank you very much for this. You've enlightened me a lot more. I was hoping to get another perspective, and I certainly got it. My brain is working 1,000 miles a minute now, wondering if Big Pharma is trying to kill these birds. Like, I don't want to be speculating, and I don't want to get all conspiratorial, but there's a lot of connections to what happened with the COVID vaccine and how they were using PCR and amplifying and false positives. And yeah, there seems to be something weird going on here that might be industry related. I got to look into this some more. So thank you very much for your time. Do you have any final comments for Albertans, Canadians, people that could be watching this, especially the farm themselves?
Yes, well, I want to say that, you know, we do really sympathize with you. America, I think most of Americans do sympathize with Canada, do sympathize with Universal Ostrich Farms and this disastrous, despicable situation. And we will continue to support you and continue to voice our concerns. And I really do hope, and this is a message to the Canadian government, make the right choice or forever be tainted with your despicable actions. Don't do it. Stop the call. Make the right choice.
Yeah, at this stage, Canadian government, there is no vaccine for ignorance. So you're not going to get any protection. So maybe it's a good time to just step back, withdraw the order, drop the Supreme Court decision or option, because getting a Supreme Court decision for the farm is going to eliminate any options that the Canadian government has to repeat this in the future, which we would love, but maybe risk is going to be too high for them. They should probably step away from this issue now. Nicolas, have yourself a great day. Happy to talk with you again soon, and we'll stay up to date on this issue as it unfolds here in Canada. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so hang out. I'm just going to finish up, and then we'll chat a little bit more. All right, Canadians, Canadian government, Supreme Court justices, anybody who's taking a look at this issue right now, at minimum, we should be researching these birds. Minimum. There's no doubt in my mind now. There is actually no reason to kill these birds off, murder these birds off. At minimum, why did they survive? Can they survive again? And is this the beginning of a way to provide natural immunity? At minimum, test them, research them, and keep them alive. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this special episode. I hope you share this out, and I hope you learned something. I know I did. And I definitely want to make sure that the right people are listening to this. Governments should be paying attention to this. And I'm very proud of my county who's taken a stand, says these birds need to be, they need to survive, and we need to take another look at these before you possibly eliminate the solution to avian flu altogether. Thank you for your time. Make sure you take care of each other, and God bless.